New for 2026 at GT World events, the GT3 Revival Series, and it is an eagerly awaited debut here at Paul Ricard. David Anderson and Joe Osborne trackside. Starting to feel old, as these are cars that, in many cases, we've either seen in years past, and not that many years ago, but in Joe's case, some that he's driven, and actually are still going, which is a rarity. But there are quite a few on this grid that have got your fingerprints on them.
Yeah, I didn't know if you meant the car or me there that's still going, but yeah, what an honour to be able to commentate on so many cars that, one, I've driven or I've raced against, and shows you the success of GT3, doesn't it? That we're now still going strong, 59 cars in the main series of GT World Challenge, and already over 30 cars in this revival series of cars that feel like just yesterday.
Now, there is another series for GT3 cars run by Sean Lynn's Motor Racing Legends concern in the UK. There is some crossover, and it's an MRL grid that we're going to see as a support race for the CrowdStrike 24 Hours of Spa. However, don't worry about the fact that the two of them just wallow in what we have. Many of the cars in their original colour schemes, not all, we'll get to those in due course. One or two cars, not only in their original colours, but with their original drivers, like Jean-Luc Beaubilic's Ferrari, like Pierre Hershey's BMW. These are cars that they drove in period and have kept hold of, and you know, the market sort of swung back their way. But it's a chance to reminisce as much as look forward to competitive action, because these are still great cars. Yeah,
and there's some good drivers in the order as well. As you can see, the SLS, Mercedes there, the gold wing doors may pop up there. The naturally aspirated V8, we don't get to say that much to the 458, the V12 Vantage going there, another one coming past as well. And it's quite cool to see which liveries the teams use. If it's not in its original livery, which I personally think they should be, if they're not, which ones they've picked and why.
Well, you'll find one car which is in WRT leopard colours, which is not its genuine livery, but a previous owner liked it, got Vincent Voss's permission and put the colour scheme on the car, but it does trick you. You think, there it is, in fact. You think, oh, it's that WRT car. It isn't. It's an old Rosberg car, that, from the German championship, the ADAC championship. It also shows you how the cars have evolved. And you look at the Audis, and they don't look massively different, but you see how the Mercedes has come on from that original SLS to what we have now, and they're also the Aston Martin, the R Racing car. Quick walk up the pit lane to the ex-Christopher Mies, Frank Stippler and Andre Lotterer R8. That was a car that was third at Spa back in 2013, and that goes back, that car, to the very first season of the Blancpain Endurance Series at the Christophers, Hassler and Mies and Stefan Ortelli. Just to bring it full circle, here we are talking about GT3 Revival. Christopher Haas's car. Christopher is here in a GT3 race in an Audi R8. What's revived?
He could go full circle. Why is he not racing it here? Yes. And yeah, when you think the engine in the back of both of those cars is the same lump, it's just been evolved over the years. And the Audi was almost the best instance of GT3, wasn't it? I raced the first one, had electric glass windows.
Wow.
The pit lane speed limiter was a cruise control stalk that you just pushed away from you to activate. And yeah, now it's still competing at the highest level in a fourth generation car, effectively.
But you look at some of the early cars, like the Audi, like the Ferrari 458s, even the Porsches, and then you compare them against the current car, and you can see how GT3 has evolved in terms of the aero, in terms of the width of the car. I mean, some of these, I can remember doing the circuit commentary at Silverstone on the very first FIA GT3 European race. You know, they were like production sports cars compared to what we have now, far closer to a road car than GT3 now. And that's not a criticism, it's just evolution.
Yeah, it's where motorsport goes, doesn't it? It's all marginal gains, all starts to add up into tenths, into seconds, and then before you know it, your car's not competitive anymore because you've hit the ceiling of performance, so you have to move on. And yeah, these were the ideology of GT racing, weren't they, really? That you took a road car, you made it safe with a roll cage, put slicks and a wing on it to make it a bit quicker, and off you went. And manufacturers loved it so much, they decided to take the idea and keep running with it. Well,
indeed so, because they also realised they could sell cars, they could sell upgrade kits, and. And one of the beauties of this, when it began, it was a full grid of 40-odd or so cars at Silverstone in the first weekend of May, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And Stefan Rattel's idea was that he would go to the manufacturers and say, you need to build cars for this, and what you need to do is build a minimum of 6 and get 3 teams to run 2 of them. And that was basically the prerequisite for being in the championship. So it meant that straight away manufacturers were building cars and there were teams running them, so therefore they were invested in it because it was their business to keep going and to sell drives and run the cars and run them well, and it just carried on growing, and it was an instant success, as I say, with 40 plus for the first Silverstone weekend. And who won the first ever GT3 European race?
I don't know.
Hector Lester and Alan Simonson.
No way.
That's your answer.
Yeah, I raced against them quite a lot of times, and yeah, Hector Lester was a great ambassador for the bronze, and obviously the late great Alan Simonson was one of the fastest guys around, and yeah, I remember their Ferraris fondly with the lucky shamrock on the side.
That's right. Yeah. And Hector Lester, who did come back tangentially to the sport a year or two ago as a team owner in single seaters, but it didn't last very long. But yeah, he and Alan made a really good partnership and won that first Silverstone race. And it was they didn't win the championship, but they did win the first race, and it was a really good season. As you look there at one of the Ferraris, so the entry for this weekend, 29 cars, and more to come. I was talking to Bob Neville earlier on, who ran Nissans. He's here this weekend with a McLaren, but go back a decade or so, he was running Nissans, and people were saying to him from SRO earlier in the weekend, why didn't you enter the GT3 Revival? Well, I wasn't sure if my car was eligible or not. Yes, we'll have it. So Bob and Simon Watts, who owns the team these days, are thinking about which races they can do. They're going to do Spa, certainly. So I think we're going to see more and more of these cars, and as attention builds towards GT3 Revival, it's understandable. Many of the drivers we've seen on contemporary GT3 grids not that long ago. One name that we'll get to for the second qualified session is that of Alvaro Perent, who of course was synonymous with McLarens for a long, long time.
Yeah, and he was seriously quick, wasn't he, in the 650, I remember, and actually a shame maybe not to have a 12C McLaren out there as well, because that was quite a game changer at the time, carbon tub, and really kind of started off the twin-turbo V8 era that so many cars have now gone to. But yeah, you watch these cars fly through scene, and yeah, it's amazing how quickly it moves on. Like you said, the downforce is strong, but it's mainly generated from that large rear wing, whereas now the modern GT3 cars have so many aerodynamic flicks and the whole car is shaped like a wing, whereas these earlier iterations just don't quite have that downforce grip.
One or two names familiar from British GT. You've got Adam Ballon and Phil Keane sharing a car. You've got Peter Molesdale and Matt Topham sharing a Barwell run car as well. And their number 10 Ferrari, Benjamin Ricci, who we've seen of late in GT2, GT3 and GT4. So another season, another category, but going back to cars that he's raced before.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to speak to these drivers. How has it changed in the 10 years that they've not been racing? Is it like you remembered? Or has it changed? Or has it got better than you remember? And, yeah, the other thing that's changed, obviously, the tyre technology. So now the car's still running on Pirellis, but those Pirellis have evolved, obviously, so much. So they'll be feeling quite different underneath as we get the V10 R8 thundering out of the last corner now. And yeah, the traction control systems are that much more archaic. Now there's almost infinite amount of changes, whereas on these it was preset and you just had to run what you had underneath you.
Now, if you've been watching during the course of the day, qualifying for current GT3 cars, you can see how the Porsche has evolved, looking far wider and a slightly different aero shape to it these days. Of course, that 911 is always going to be obvious, given the way that Porsche designed the car, and quite right too, but you can see how it's become larger, wider, and other cars the same. So, sorry, go on.
So the first GT3 guy I ever drove was the 997 Porsche that we just saw, and that still had a sequential gearbox. Right. So none of this paddle shift. You had to still take a hand off and push it down. I remember the first time I went out in the car and I downshifted. I was like, pretty sure I saw the throttle pedal move, and it was as simple as there was a piece of wire connecting the gear lever to the throttle pedal to blip the throttle for you. So that was your downshift, auto heel and toe effectively. Right. But if you were to suggest that to an engineer now, how you should downshift the car, I think you might get laughed out the office.
Who was running that Porsche? Track speed?
Morna Motorsport in the first year, an FIA GT3. Right, yeah. Which is really now Blancpain Sprint, of course. And then, yeah, the next year after that, it was a track speed car. In
British. So, Gulf liveried Porsche being slightly dive bombed there by Benjamin Ricci. Matt Topham has gone fastest in the Barwell run BMW Z4, which is Peter Molesdale's car, but Matt Topham doing the time.
Actually, just to go on my history last bit, that Z4 is a car I raced in British GT with 888 running it, and that thing is an absolute weapon. If you get to come to any of the events, just listening to that V8, that was actually technically never put in a Z4 road car. It was the M3 engine that they plonked in there. I think is probably a bit of a cult classic hero. That Z4 is a phenomenal piece of kit. We're on board there with the Ford, and again, don't want to turn this into sort of a historic festival, but just look at the dash, how quickly it's changed there, and you can see Martin is slightly stuck behind the Audi at the moment. Now Fender's passing is going to easily clear onto the Mistral straight, and these cars are unable to go full throttle on that turn 7 onto the back straight, whereas now it's not a corner at all. So yeah, these cars are going to be hard work for the drivers, especially in the races tomorrow. Driver cooling wasn't so much of a priority back in the day, so the high temperatures we're getting here at the moment could be a factor for the drivers come race day tomorrow.
Celia Martin here in the Ford GT, which in period was run by the Matek squad, and it did take FIA GT3 title honours. Thomas Much was one of the real stars in that car. Celia Martin, part of the Iron Dames squad, and very much a contemporary sports car racer, having driven of late in German GT4 and Asian Le Mans and the WEC. But the Ford GT that was aiming, if you like, to sort of replicate the shape of the GT40. You didn't see many on the road, but they were good GT3 cars.
Yeah, I remember when the GT1 World Championship adopted GT3 cars, and these things were phenomenal, weren't they? Mark VDS running them back in those days.
Right, yeah.
The pit stops were crazy, weren't they? The mechanics had the dive bottle on their back so they could run round the car. So you're basically running around a car with a high pressure bomb on your back trying to change the tyres. And remember them racing at Abu Dhabi Yas Marina. It was a phenomenal series for so many of these cars. So
this is the view coming over the timing line. Celia Martin's car sounds fantastic. We've got one of the Fords having just gone second, in fact. Philippe Guillaume's car up to second in the times. That right now, Benjamin Ricci 3 seconds clear. Jean-Luc Beaubelic has yet to do a time. I think there's one that hasn't actually ventured out, so we'll try and work out which one it is in a moment. But 29 cars on the entry, 28 have been seen on the timing screen. Number 7 there is Jonathan Mitchell's Aston Martin, which is driven by a very, very quick Jonathan Mitchell. Came out of Caterham's and has also done some 2-litre historic sports car racing to the Chevron B19 that he races. But this Vantage GT3, another car that was very, very successful in its time.
It's just that noise, 2 V12s running together, V24 basically singing along there, and it's a beautiful engine, that V12, no turbo. Remember Spa 24, probably 2014 I was racing one. There was a huge crash at the start of the race that wiped out 3 of the 4 ProDrive cars, and the only one that survived was mine. And I knew we were still in the race when I'd wake up at 2 AM because I could hear a V12 singing around. And yeah, just a phenomenally sounding car. So to have a few of these on the grid is a real spectacle.
And you can see also how the cars have evolved, and you put a couple of Astons together and see the slight difference in the aero and the wings and all of that, and you can see how progress was made as the cars moved from DBRS9 to DBR9 to Vantage and onwards. But yeah, a huge amount of GT3 machinery built and sold in that 20-year period since the category began, not just in Europe, but worldwide.
Yeah, and like, it's easy to forget, like the Audi R8 had a one-make championship in China at one point. Yeah. And the R8, the most popular car GT3-wise in sales, if you count every single iteration, over 500 chassis have been sold by Audi. And again, it's kind of the frustration with Audi pulling out their support in GT3 racing.
Yeah, they're solding a bit in Asia, aren't they? But not to the same level. So Ricci from now here, Jonathan Mitchell, second in the times, as he makes his way now up towards the line, and then behind Sean Lynn with his ex-TF Motorsport Sally Orich car. This looking up is Matt Topham in the Ecuria Cos BMW Z4. In the period colour scheme, it was a Marco Attard Alexander Sims, British GT Championship winning entry, drove in the European Le Mans Series with Ollie Bryant, Alistair McKay, Andrew Smith, Joe Twyman. Had a Spa 24 podium, I think, when Alex Sims joined back in. So it's a car with proper history and in the proper livery. And there is the 888 BMW, the ex-Lee Mole and Joe Osborne Z4, no less.
Yeah, those cars, those two Z4s raced against each other in British GT a lot. It was always Sims versus myself, and Sims was just phenomenally fast. One of the most frustrating drivers to race against. They were so quick. But going back to Topham's lockup, that shouldn't have happened. So maybe an ABS issue there that they'll need to keep an eye on. But we now look at this Christophe Van Ulsen car, and I've met Christophe, and he's a lovely guy, and his father's on the grid as well in an R8, and relatively new to motorsport, Christophe, but he's going to be seriously fast, and at the moment in that 888 car is 6th overall and 2nd in class. So that's been a good run from him thus far.
Used to be in the free ride world tour as a skier, did Christophe von Oeynhausen. His father Marcus first came to prominence really in Jaguar E-types, in Masters Gentleman Drivers 60s GT cars, but has got this passion for more recent GT machinery. So Benjamin Ricci's Ferrari there is currently the fastest car, perhaps not surprising given that Benjamin has, you know, even last year been racing at the highest level of GT racing. Yeah,
and it's just looking so quick. So whenever you put a pro in a car like this, they suddenly start to come alive and work harder. Big slide out the last corner there. Got time for one more lap. So car's still improving. Again, no tyre almost like GT4, so they'll still be finding some tyre temp, but a lot of them running together as well. So might start to get some traffic or a slipstream if you're lucky.
Audi versus Ferrari. 87 there is the car of Jean-Luc Bobelic, and that is now up to 6th in the times, and that is a car that Jean-Luc drove in the early days of the Blancpain Endurance Series, for example. It's had 3 starts within the 24 Hours of Spa under its historic belt, and Jean-Luc Bobelic, and inevitably his co-driver Jim Pla joining him. So you know, for Jean-Luc it goes full circle. This number 2 Audi is the car that we were talking about earlier on of Marcus von Oeynhausen, the Lotterer Mies Stippler chassis from the 2013 Spa 24.
I believe it finished 3rd there.
It did.
So it was a competitive car, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, a real lover of motorsport, that family. So it's good to get people like that involved. And for everything of GT World Challenge, it's so serious and everything's so on the knife edge all the time. This GT3 Revival seems to open up a more fun element of GT racing, which is so important for so many people.
I did go to the drivers' briefing yesterday where Stefan Rattel spoke to everybody as well and welcomed them to the new series, but made the point that, you know, we want this to be fun and enjoyable, and it was suggested that if you're involved in an incident and there is damage to somebody else's car, we would encourage you to pay half the damage bill, to make sure that driving standards are adhered to, but to make sure that it's a fun and friendly series. And, you know, this isn't GT World, this is GT3 Revival. If you want to go and be a hero, there are championships for that, but this is about driving great cars at great circuits. Yeah, be competitive, yeah, try, but be respectful. Yeah,
and that's how it should be, and hopefully Stefan's wise words ring true in the thick skull of some racing drivers is maybe a bit harder, but just watching this 3 Audi, so this is the oldest possible Audi, and the one behind you can see is an Ultra. Look at the end plates on the rear wing, that bit bigger, and they shed a load of weight, around 80 kilos lighter. So yeah, the number 3 Audi is the oldest possible iteration of it, so it will be harder to hustle on, and that's probably helped Van Ulsen here in the 2 car get round him, but pushing hard.
But that old Audi, for want of a better phrase, just to illustrate the point about how things move on in the world, it was a car driven in its time by Nicky Thiem, who's here in an Aston Martin in the GT World Challenge, Rahal Frey, who is in the pit lane working with WRT, and Marcus Winkelhock, who is on the grid in an Audi R8, but with Christopher Hauser. So, you know, once you're part of an Audi family, in some respects, you don't go anywhere.
Yeah, it shows you, it gives you a way to make a career, doesn't it? GT3, yeah. Nicky Thiem, I don't know how old he was when he was in that car, but he would have been late teens, early 20s, and yeah, he's here still earning a crust, driving a racing car in a circle. So, yeah, so many drivers thankful for the existence of GT3.
Frans van der Link goes through in the R Racing Aston Martin. Goes over the timing line to end the session. Car that he shares with Pascal Houteau. our racing Astons were Marvin Kirchhofer, Ricky Collard type chassis, weren't they, towards the later days of 1819 era of GT racing. Corvette. This is Danny Henry that's come out of McLaren Trophy. Corvette on the grid for that very first season of GT3. Of all the manufacturers that we've got in modern GT3 racing this weekend, 5 are on that very first GT3 grid at Silverstone 20 years ago. Corvette being one of them. There's the Porsche. That's another of the brands that was on the grid. This is the Nouri Competition car of Anne-Sophie Nouri, number 27. That car, a late entry, and one or two of the teams still making sure that cars are if you like, fully working before they put them onto the circuit. So in one or two cases, they were late entries, and this was a car that joined in the last few days. But one that's been missing from the session is the Brytech Motorsports Aston of Afshin Fatemi. So that car, with possible problems out of free practice, has not made it to the circuit. But that is the car that tops the times. Benjamin Ricci then, in number 10, the Storic and Race Cars entry. Storic and Race Cars being the historic racing division of Jérôme Policon's ASP Team Motorsport Promotion. So, like all shrewd businessmen, got an eye to the future, and a historic racing division operating some of the cars of the period that he knows about, namely Ferraris.
Yeah, lots of teams now sort of seeing this as another good business opportunity to run some cars, but also the teams that have hung on to their cars, the price depreciates, and then suddenly it bottoms out, and it's now starting to go the other way.
So Benjamin Ricci is the quickest from the Mercedes. We didn't really see much of Heiko Neumann's car, but again, that harks back to a 2013 Spa 24 win. Jonathan Mitchell's Aston third, and then Jean-Luc Bobelic from Christoph von Oeynhausen and Philippe Georg next. Matt Topham, 7th in the Z4. 8th, Philippe Collin Saint-Sean Lin. 9th, historic race promoter himself these days through Medal Racing Legends. And then to round out the top 10 was Janos Santa's Aston Martin. And you can see 29 cars expected. 28 made it on track. Christian Kuhn's Porsche being the slowest of them. Right, so now there is a quick break to do, in some cases, a change of driver. And then we'll go again for the grid for the second race, 15 minutes. And the nice thing about this, one of the many nice things about this series, is that there are some really quick co-drivers. Nick Padmore will take over Jean-Louis Rion's WRT Audi. You've got Alvaro Parent, yes, indeed, driving with Mark Cole in the leopard-liveried Quintet Racing Audi. Will Nuttall, who's been a real star in things like Historic Grand Prix Association, Pre-66 Grand Prix cars. Will doing something rather different in a relatively recent GT car. Phil Keane and Jim Pla, other names that we're familiar with from contemporary GT racing. They are co-drivers. And Phil Keane with Adam Ballon in the Barwell Lamborghini Gallardo, an ex-Peter Cox Leipert team car.
Yeah, some quick drivers there as well. And Phil has driven a lot of these cars as well, and does a lot of historic racing as well. So Phil Keane versus Alvaro Parent sounds quite good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's going to always be a disparity in the pace of these cars because they're from quite a wide period, isn't it? So it's not going to be neck and neck like modern racing, but the driver can still obviously make a difference. Yeah,
it's not one season, is it, that's encapsulated here? It's an era. So as you say, you've got cars that are the more recent will be the more quicker because they've got more tweaks on them. I am slightly disappointed in you that you've not found yourself a seat in one of these cars. I mean, you've driven them in the past. Nobody come and knock on the door?
I assume the door was locked, and that's why I didn't get asked. But I need to go for a wander around the paddock actually, and
with your business card.
Yeah, exactly. Just sell my soul, which all racing drivers should be doing. But no, it'd be good to get in there. I'd be lucky to drive some of them after they found new owners, and they're slower over a lap. But I'm sure it's all in your mind. But the emotion and the smile they bring to your face still, that never changes. And I think that's why this series is actually going to boom. I think once people see it out there, they're going to go, oh, I've got something that I would like to drive. Let's bring that out.
Yeah, I touched on the Janos Santa Aston Martin. That's another one of yours, isn't it? The MP Motorsport car.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal thing. I remember racing that here back in the day with Mark Poole and Richard Aber, and we had some phenomenal races. Silverstone, I remember we did a strange strategy, and I ended up leading for a bit going into the final hour, and yeah.
What you did?
Yeah, well, we just stayed out later than everyone else.
Right.
So, but it was a phenomenal car, and yeah, I just remember Pro Drive running that thing, and it was a beautiful existence in motorsport.
Ferrari good to go. That is the, as you see, DHL liveried entry. Door closed. Car controller will give the signal shortly. Nick Padmore will be one to watch, won't he? Jean-Louis Rion's early R8. Nick, we know he's just mind-blowingly quick in historic cars of all manner.
It's just looking at even like the safety element of these cars. The driver's seat has no head support around the side. It's just like a desk chair strapped into the car. So we're talking about performance a lot, but the safety of these things has moved on phenomenally fast as well. And again, that's all down to SRO, the FIA, the crash testing that has to go through when a car's homologated. But yeah, this SLS in the south of France sunshine is some spectacle.
So 2013, this type of car, I'm not saying it's this chassis, but Bernd Schneider, Maxi Goetz, who's again racing here in Mercedes, and Maxi Buch, Spa 24 winners, and the Mercedes was a really good GT3 car in that period. Of course, then you got, as you touched on earlier, the crossover where GT3 machinery started to take over in the GT1 World Championship in its final couple of seasons, but the Maxis won the GT3 European title. They got together and with Bernd Schneider won at Spa. But see how Mercedes has come. You know, this was quite a futuristic car when we first saw it, and now it looks a little dated compared to the contemporary Mercedes AMG, but in its time it was great, and it was another user-friendly car. You mentioned the McLaren, the MP4, a little while ago. Well, that wasn't user-friendly. Lots of AMs got hold of them and just couldn't cope. There were quite a lot of damaged ones at Monza when they first came onto the grid.
Yeah.
And a few people struggled that year. They never really delivered. But Audi and Mercedes got it right. They needed turnkey cars that the bronze, the AMs, I mean, we didn't have bronzes in that era. I think we still called it the Gentleman Trophy. For the real amateur drivers, but they had to be cars that they could cope with.
Yeah, it's funny though, the Mercedes was almost the other way. It was boring. So I remember test driving it with a customer of mine at the Nürburgring, Lee Moll, and we drove 3 cars that day to decide which one he wanted to buy. Mercedes was one, and we both got on and went, it was nice, but it was a bit boring, wasn't it? And the one we bought was the Z4 because of the emotion and the drama that was attached with it. And yeah, and we said about the Z4 already, there's not many out there. That's the other thing, these cars can get some value quite quickly. I remember these being around £100,000 as it's going relatively slow. I wonder if it still has an issue or just trying to find some space on track at the moment. But yeah, suddenly these cars have gone from maybe £100,000 to 300, 400, 500. It's a huge market for these suddenly.
And the V8 engine in the Z4 was through special dispensation, wasn't it? Because there wasn't a Z4 with a V8 engine. You know, it only existed really in the race car.
Yeah, it was almost a question of why wasn't it done in real life for the road, as we get to look inside that V8 and you can see it's flung all the way back to try and help the weight distribution. And there's obviously a problem with that car. Mechanics getting to work trying to diagnose the issue. And I guess that's going to be maybe the only negative I could say about the series is older cars are harder to run, and that's maybe going to be where the good teams stand out with keeping these cars circulating.
That car you've just seen, Jonathan Hershey at the wheel, it's his father's car, Pierre Hershey, and it's one that Pierre raced in period, both in Blancpain Endurance and in the French GT Championship. I still think the Z4 is probably my ultimate GT3 car because it looked fast, it looked dramatic, it always sounded fantastic, and in the early days there were these great battles in what we then had as Blancpain Endurance Series between the WRT Audis that, you know, effectively was a factory squad, and the Mark VDS Z4s that was always a bit the underdog. Bas Leijnders driving them and also being the team manager and taking on the might. And, you know, it's 2 Belgian teams, but the underdog and all the support always seemed to go the way of the Z4s. And eventually they did have that Spa 24 win, Nick Katzberg heading up the driver lineup. But brilliant battles we had in the early days. Now here, Lindsay Brewer is on board the Ford GT, which is another great sounding car, and Alvaro Parent is also looking rapid in the number 47 Audi that he's taken over from the experienced Mark Cole. So there's quite a lot going on with 9.5 minutes to go. Yeah,
we're riding on board this Ford GT for a car that looks so brutish. Looks quite nimble, doesn't it? We're looking at the steering inputs. It doesn't look too heavy, and here's that 62R Racing Aston Martin, lovely flat grey. I think of that car. I think of that huge shunt Kirchhoff had at Bathurst, where he sort of half flipped it and then grinded along the top of the wall and managed to get out unscathed. I actually watched the onboard once. He had it on his phone. We were watching it at dinner. It was a monster crash, but yeah, again, a nice livery on that Aston.
Talking of monsters, the Leopard here, the Leopard colour scheme, that was a WRT livery, which this car did not carry. This was a Rosberg team car initially in the German GT Championship, and Cesar Campanico had quite a large accident with it at Zandvoort, I think in 2014, but Michael Ammermüller, Bent Henhofer, Johannes Seidlitz, Kenneth Heyer were the drivers for the Rosberg team, but the car passed into private hands a few years ago, and the owner, who was a proper motor racing historian, decided this was a livery that he liked, got in touch with Vincent Voss and said, I know it wasn't one of your cars, but do you mind if I put the livery on it? And Vincent said, yeah, fine. And now the car's been sold on again. Sean Lynn, who runs the MRL GT3 series, is very much the car must be in the right livery. So there's a little bit of nose wrinkling, but it's early days in the history of GT3 Revival, and it'll all settle down. But it is a charismatic livery. It's just not one that this car carried at the time. So that might offend some people, and others might not care.
Almost feel like it's either got to be the right livery or whoever claims it first gets it. And so then that's your reward for coming to the championship early doors, is you choose your livery. It's like you get to choose your number. Yeah. Well, you can choose your livery if you're in there first. I hope we don't get any conflict liveries which are identical, because that'd be a good one to commentate on, trying to work out who is who.
This is Jim Pla, by the way, who's about to go for a time as he comes up to break the beam, and Jim Pla goes 7th in Jean-Luc Beaumelic's Ferrari, and Alvaro Parent is fastest. Here he is in the car these days owned by Mark Cole, who himself has been around for a long, long time racing. If you go back, feels like about 30 years to Fiestas, but more recently Porsche Carrera Cup GB in its early days. He was a class champion in that. Alvaro Parent, I'm trying to think as to how much racing of Audis Alvaro will have done, because largely he was a McLaren driver.
Yeah, I only really think of him in McLaren's especially, but he did a bit in a Bentley, did he, in the US with K-Pax,
yeah,
I think. Yeah. Yeah, Alvaro's just one of those boys, jumps in anything and is rapid. And
we don't see much of him anymore, though.
No, we really don't. It's such a shame. He's a cool guy. I love hanging out with him, but yeah, he's got a laid-back ethos on life.
Right. So this suits him down to the ground now. Just come along, have some fun. Drive some cool cars.
Yeah, I saw him at lunch yesterday. He's horizontal. He's very, very Portuguese. Loves his surfing and sun, and yeah, no stress.
But for a period, there was barely a GT3 race that had a McLaren on the grid that he did not drive, and he was absolutely everywhere. British Formula 3 champion, Formula Renault 3.5 champion. Benjamin Ricci, meanwhile, is still hustling on as a solo driver in the Ferrari. Heading up now towards the timing line once more. He is not the fastest this time around, but he might improve on this lap. Breaks the beam, was 12th, and he's up to 2nd.
Yeah, 2 purple sectors, that final sector that Alvaro seems to be dominating at the moment. Sorry, as Jim Pla now is going to come through. That's the mix-up of liveries I was talking about. And yeah, this 458 again, it did so well. I remember when it first came out, it had a real problem with the front subframe snapping, and you just see him at the end of the race, the splitter just flapping along on the floor. And again, that's how the development has changed. No car would be released with an issue like that these days.
An Audi has come to a halt by the look of it, and trying to see whose car that might be. It is facing the wrong way, isn't it? Coming out of turn 7. And we're about to see how it got there, because it clips the curb and around it goes. Is that Nick Padman's car? No, it's not.
No, it's the 58, I think, isn't it? Speedmore Motorsport Management. And he's got going again now, so maybe just need a bit of a start and reset.
That's Jeff Isringhausen, the American Porsche dealer. Been a busy Porsche racer back home, but has decided an Audi is the car to have. Also, just carrying on with our connections to ancient and modern, if you like, Stefan Ortelli, whose car we have seen, Stefan was always going to be here anyway because he driver coaches Louis Pret, but I've seen more of Stefan in the GT3 Revival paddock than in the GT World Challenge pit lane. Partly because one of his old cars is there. And Stefan himself has one car of this era. We saw him racing at Spa a couple of years ago at the Centenary 24 Hours. So it wouldn't be a surprise if Stefan were to be found on the grid before the end of the year. Yeah,
I'm even more sure he's got his crash helmet and suit in the boot of his car, living down the road in Monaco a couple hours from here. I'm sure he would have just... Well, I might as well put it in the back just in case anyone asks.
Heiko Neumann, meanwhile, in the Mercedes coming up towards the end of the lap. Heiko Neumann, somebody else that's been a regular GT racer. This car, Heinz-Harald Frentzen actually drove in Blancpain endurance races, along with Lukas Stolz on the grid this weekend in a Mercedes. So for some, you get hooked into it.
Some of these drivers are dyeing their hair, aren't they? If Lukas Stolz was in this car, which looks as good as he does now, there's definitely a bit of Benjamin Button syndrome going on.
Well, Philippe Alliot, he was always a hair dyer, wasn't he? The French Formula 1 racer. Right, there is the Osborne Mole Z4, the 888 car from Limel's part ownership, and Ian Harrison, a great touring car boss who'd worked for the Williams Formula 1 team, was 888 UK effectively, and now Christophe van Neuenhausen at the wheel.
Yeah, scariest team manager I've ever had, Ian Harrison.
But a brilliant bloke.
I got a text message from him about 20 minutes ago, and I'm still scared when he texts me now, over 10 years ago. But yeah, I have to say, Christophe is hustling this car hard. I've been talking to him quite a lot over the winter. He's been testing and doing a fair amount of racing as well to try and get up to speed, and lovely guy, and he seems to have done a really good job. He'll be happy with qualifying one, and even now how he's stacking up against the true pros, he's had a very good session.
If Ian Harrison is watching this and reminiscing, then it's great to have him on board, as it were, but he's not been in great health of late. He came to some touring car meetings last year, and it was as though he'd never been away, telling everybody what they were doing wrong and showing a keen interest, but an absolutely fantastic character, Ian Harrison. And yeah, he could be decidedly scary. He had a scowl like nobody else's, but also a terrific bloke.
Yeah, one of the best. I learned so much from him, so much respect, and yeah, he was definitely one of the good guys. Unfortunately, they don't make people like that anymore, do they? Try and find me a modern-day Ian Harrison. It's not a thing that exists anymore.
But never did you think, I wonder what he meant. Ian would absolutely tell you whether it was what you wanted to hear or not. Didn't gel with everybody, but he ran a very, very good operation. Right.
Sorry, another character actually looking at this guy was John Gore, who was the MD of ProDrive at the time, and again I had a few run-ins with him when I was one of their drivers.
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah, well, I wonder why I don't have a driving one. I might be able to work this out in a second.
Yeah, you're right. John was MD of the company for a time, but he started off as a, was it Walker's or Smith's Crisp sales director, regional sales director.
I also remember him racing one in British GT alongside Phil Dryber and causing a massive crash at turn 1 at Snetterton, wiping out 2 or 3 of his own customers. And I was like, kind of good, because he's just sold a load of spares.
Yeah, John, I think, came out of Caterham's, didn't he, and had a go in Clio's, and then found himself a berth with the ProDrive Aston Equipe. Meanwhile, this car now, Pascal Houteau at the wheel, is the R Racing entry. Now, Pascal Houteau 2 years ago was AM champion GT4 European Series. So again, somebody that's racing GT cars regularly and recently, and going well in that car. So Jim Pla from Alvaro Parent, the front row. That sounds pretty cool, doesn't it?
It really does, doesn't it? It just feels like we've gone back in time. And yeah, 1.3 seconds behind him is Alvaro. It doesn't look like Alvaro's going to be able to improve now. And again, tyres starting to drop off as everyone starts their final lap. And you can see Z4 getting past the 430 there. So that's that disparity of generation. They wouldn't have spent much time on track together. That 430 much older than the BMW Z4.
So the flag is imminent. We're about 20-odd seconds away. As I suspect for some, there'll have been an element of caution in this session, but the more confident they get, both in their ability to drive the cars and also in the team's ability for them to be pushed, we'll see more. That is the ex-Peter Cox Lippert Lamborghini, the Gallardo, that's now got Phil Keane at the wheel. He's taken it over from Adam Ballon. So compare and contrast that with the current Temerario. Phil Keane comes through who was, of course, briefly a Lamborghini affiliated driver, wasn't he?
Yes, and that was back in the Huracan, right? So
That's right.
He was very quick in that. We shared a car, actually, a Huracan at Spa 24 Hours, and he was phenomenally fast. And he was our nominated Super Bowl driver ahead of Oliver Gavin we had in that car that year, alongside John Minchell as RM. That was a phenomenally fast lineup, and Barwell did a good job for us, and we ended up finishing, I think, 3rd in class actually at the end of that Spa 24.
So the flag out as Anne-Sophie Nouri comes through to take the flag in the 997 iteration of the 911. Porsche don't go in for this Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV bit. They give different type numbers to the cars, but you go from 997 to 991 and then 991.2, and it all gets rather messy.
Yeah, we're on the 992 next, aren't we? And we've already used 993. So
yeah, and that was
before the 996.
Yeah, the 993 was in the early 90s, wasn't it? So yes, it is a tad confusing at times. But anyway, Jim Pla's Ferrari, I know you stand with Ferraris, is fastest. So Pla, Parent, Ricci, Mitchell, Hutto and Keen is the pointy end of the grid. Checkered flag, you can see both physically being waved and flashed on the gantry. 911 is the 911 of Christian Kuhn. That car from the Speed Motorsport Management stable. Christian has been a regular in the Le Mans Classic over the last few years, and lots of these drivers you'll find have done a variety of historic categories, but feel like doing something different, something else, something that they weren't able to race at the time. And as they get used to a bit of aero in the cars, they'll get faster and faster. How did Will Nuttall do? He was 9th fastest in the Ferrari. The Matek Ford in the clouds and colours comes down the pit lane. That car at the end of the session is 21st, Lindsay Brewer. We've not seen much of the Corvette, but there it is. And Danny Henry's Chevrolet 18th in the times. Right, let's have a quick run through the order. Jim Pla fastest from Alvaro Parent. So you've got Ferrari from Audi, from Ferrari, Benjamin Ricci, from Aston of Jonathan Mitchell, then Aston Pascal Hutto, and Lamborghini Phil Keen next. The Mercedes SLS of Heiko Neumann, BMW Christopher Neuenhausen, Ferrari Will Nuttall, and 10th Philippe Guillaume in the next of the Ford GTs, the Matek engineered car. 2 classes, Pro-Am and Am, and we'll look forward to the first races in the GT3 Revival tomorrow here at Paul Ricard, where they will hit the track first at 9:15 tomorrow morning. More history to come. We'll see you tomorrow.